Welcome to Licensed Poetics, a podcast where we talk about stories. I'm your host, Fang Ling.
And I'm your host, Ahim.
And we have a very special and exciting guest with us today, poet Stephanie Niu. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Amazing. We will interview Stephanie in depth later in this episode after our usual What You're Reading section, where we do our reading updates. Feel free to pitch in, Stephanie.
Will do.
I'll start by talking about Big Swiss by Jen Beagin. Jen Beagin is an American writer who lives in Hudson, New York. Her other books are Pretend I'm Dead, published in 2015, and Vacuum in the Dark, 2019. And Big Swiss is her latest novel, published in 2023, this year. We love contemporary reads. I say this because I usually read classics and I don't read too much contemporary fiction. So I'm trying to work on that, and This was my attempt. So Big Swiss is a work of literary fiction. And I saw on Goodreads that many people are comparing Big Swiss with authors like Ottessa Moshfegh, who is best known for her novel My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which I haven't read. Have any of you read it?
No.
I read it at the start of this year, which was in many ways my own year of rest and relaxation.
We'll get into that later. But yes, Steph is doing something very exciting this year. Did you like My Year of Rest and Relaxation?
I did. I know it's kind of divisive, but I found the character very unlike most characters I read in fiction, and it was just an interesting character to sort of try to understand the psyche of.
Yeah. I think I know what you mean. And people say that Big Swiss is a type of book that's really popular at the moment, which is literary fiction about unstable women doing unhinged things.
Yeah.
Would you say My Year of Rest and Relaxation is like that?
Very much so.
Yeah, well, I haven't read that. I probably will one day. And I think Big Swiss was my first foray into this very popular genre. And I have to say, it was not a very promising start. It did not make me very enthusiastic about this genre. I was a little bit reminded of Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I never made it past page 50 of that book. Scandalous, I know, but that's a story for a different episode. Okay. I think I will probably read a few more books from this genre just to give it another chance. But I'm not too excited about it. I'll explain why. Big Swiss has a fascinating premise, actually. We follow a 45-year-old woman named Greta who lives in Hudson, New York, which I learned from this book is a very tiny town. Her job is to transcribe therapy sessions. Her employer is the local sex therapist, and her job is to type out the therapy sessions, listening to the recording. She doesn't know the clients' full names, only their initials. But because it's such a small town, and people talk about personal details in therapy sessions, it's not difficult to work out who is who. So she kind of is behind the scenes and knows all the dirt on everyone, but they don't know that she knows. Greta feels very drawn to the voice of one particular patient. Greta knows that she's a young woman originally from Switzerland, and she gave her a nickname, Big Swiss. Yes.
So like a Swiss cheese.
A little bit like that. The reason Big Swiss goes to therapy is because she has never had an orgasm in her entire life. And eventually, Greta meets Big Swiss in town, but does not tell her that she knows her already from transcribing her sessions. And eventually, the two women begin an affair, which is really a doomed love story. So that was the premise. And I thought it was so interesting and so many like moral nuances and tricky situations to navigate, which is why I decided to read this book. But unfortunately, there were many things in this book that I felt it did sort of okay, but not great. And when a book has too many okay, but not great things, it becomes a okay, not great book. Okay, the first thing I wanted to talk about is what I like to call the issue of contextualization or lack thereof. Is when a novel is written in a very, for lack of a better term, a very unself-aware way. And what I mean is when the writer seems to assume the reader lives in the same world as the writer. And then, so they'll use like little quirky references, little smart comments that when I read, I feel would only make sense if the reader lives in the exact same world as the writer. If the reader is from even a slightly different world, all those references would be lost on them, and then it would just not make any sense at all.
Do you remember what some of those references were?
I was going to get into that, but then I don't want to come across as nitpicky.
Fair.
I created a fictional example.
Okay.
For example, if you read this line, she seems the type of person to drink tea, not coffee. I would read that and go, okay, that means literally nothing to me. In the worlds that I have lived in, drinking tea and coffee can have subtle meanings about like something it says about a person, but it varies dramatically depending on where you are, the people around you. And then if the writer had set it up that in the world of the book, people who drink tea are poor or people who drink coffee are rich, or give them something like world building, I would read that and be like, okay, so she doesn't seem like the type of person who is rich. So that gives me something like specific detail. But then when the world building or context is not there, it just comes across as annoying. I'm like, why would you assume I know what it's like? I know what drinking tea or coffee in this world means. I don't. I live in a completely different world to these authors who, in this genre, who are typically white women living in America. I'm from a completely different world. And that's fine. I read to learn about other worlds, but you have to like build the world up for me so that I know what you're talking about.
So you feel like in your current world, that sentence doesn't do anything to add to the character for you?
No, it does not. It does not. And it adds some confusion. Or the author assumes that it means the same thing in my world as it does in your world, which it almost never does.
But wouldn't that add more credibility to that character? Just because there's so like little minute details?
I love details. That's not the problem. The problem is that it's not set up properly. Like I said, if she has built the world where I know very clearly what these details point to, then that would add credibility instead of take away it.
Okay.
Anyway, in Big Swiss, there was definitely this problem, but not too much of it. I did finish the book. I did not get so annoyed that I threw it at the wall like I did Conversations with Friends. Okay. And another thing about Big Swiss is that it jumps from theme to theme without giving it like a particularly satisfying deep dive into any particular one theme. In the beginning, Big Swiss says in her therapy session that she doesn't like trauma people. And she doesn't like how people use trauma as justification for their shitty behavior. And she doesn't like that trauma people let trauma define them, almost. And exactly. Well, I thought that was a very interesting thing to say, and because it's at the beginning of the novel, I was expecting the author to kind of build an argument to either agree with it or counter it. But then, like, the way that the plot unfolded and things happened, it didn't point my mind back to the theme of trauma. So I just felt like the book chucked a huge question at me without giving me an answer. And I don't mean that any book has to tell me what the correct way of dealing with trauma is. No, that's an unanswerable question. I just wanted a more nuanced deep dive, but it kind of jumped around.
Because this is a huge question to open.
Exactly. I also think it's huge. And there was Big Swiss and Greta's respective traumas from their personal lives. Those are mentioned in the book. But again, it just... The main plot is still the relationship between them and the love story. And I didn't see how their trauma played into it. Oh, and the final thing is the main thing, which is the love story between Greta and Big Swiss. The two women didn't have anything in common. Greta was 45 years old, no family, no kids, living in a crumbling house with a roommate who sells weed. Big Swiss was 27 years old, a professional woman who makes a lot of money and has a husband. And for them, in their affair, sex was the main thing. They have a lot of it. And it's not that I don't believe two women like this could fall in love. I do. But I just didn't see how they would develop this more profound attachment beyond sex. Maybe the book was trying to say that they bonded over their loneliness or their relationship with their trauma or whatever, but that wasn't really well developed or leaned into either. In the end, it even like begged the question: why is their love important? Why was it worth reading about? Even so, it just wasn't very satisfying. So yeah, that was my review of the book. A bit scathing, I know. But it is good that, like what you said, Steph, we don't often see these kind of characters represented in literature. Yeah. And it's so important to tell their stories. But I don't think we should write unhinged women just for the sake of writing unhinged women.
Yeah.
Like there's something that their story contributes to the human experience, and like a book needs to develop that for me to buy it, really.
Wow, I'm very intrigued now about this book. I feel like it, in a weird way, makes me want to read it so I can understand your analysis of it. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Honestly, I read a brilliantly written review of this book first in a magazine called Literary Review, and it convinced me to try reading the book. And yeah.
Reviews are very powerful. I think they sort of distill the meaning or the impact of writing, even if it's not something that you love. But
exactly. Yeah. I love reviews as a genre. Partly why we are creating this podcast.
Yeah.
I want to say that the part that intrigued me most is like the setting of the story, where Greta is transcribing other people's therapy sessions. It's sort of like she's eardropping on like confession chambers.
Yeah.
I feel like that created a bit of a tension, and then this mystifying sort of like a navigation.
Exactly. The setup was super interesting.
But I just don't expect it to unfold into a romance story.
Yeah, that's such a cool like voyeuristic setup. Yeah. It kind of reminds me of Rachel Cusk's Outline. Have either of you read that book?
I know about Rachel Cusk and I know about the book, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, a lot of the character feels almost like transparent for a lot of the book, and you're just hearing stories from other people through her conversations with them. And it's maybe a similar thing, like the character is almost just like a lens for you to look through at other people, and the character themselves stays a bit transparent for a long time. Although it sounds like that's not exactly what happened in Big Swiss.
No, Greta is a very her presence is very much there in the book.
I haven't really had that much time reading this past few weeks. I've been like occupied with a lot of different activities. I've been trying to move, and then I just have this little lovely book by my bedstand. It's almost like a divisive sort of like a dictionary almost, but to my life. Then it's like when I'm late night in my bed, trying to get some sort of enlightenment, trying to get some sort of comfort, I would always resort to this book, and then just almost read one section at a time. Just try to like be more present, be more grounded. And this is the book Poetry Unbound by Padraig or Tuama.
I love bedstand books. I think it's good to keep a book on the bedstand. Does anyone want to share what their bedstand book is?
I've been traveling a bit, so I feel like my bedstand is temporary, but I have Lost Lake by Bella Lee there right now, which has a lot of images and collages. So
Bella Lee, Australian poet Bella Lee.
Yeah.
I know Argosy, she wrote that one.
Yeah.
Amazing. My bedstand book, or maybe I should say coffee table book, is the Norton Anthology of Poetry.
Oh my gosh. So you both have anthologies. That's nice.
Yeah, and poetry.
Yeah.
On theme.
Yeah, so what I love particularly with this book is the author's own like personalization and internalization of the reviews of the poems. And then there's one particular scene that just imprinted on my memory. It's about this. He wrote about his adolescencehood, where one night he was so disturbed by his insomnia, which runs deep in his family. And then it was 3 a.m. He just walks out of his house, went to this coast where there's a statue of Mother Mary. And underneath it, he just...
Do you mean Virgin Mary?
Oh, yeah, something like that. Oh, yes, it's Virgin, yeah.
Statue of Virgin Mary.
Virgin Mary, yes. Okay. That plays an important part of it, of the story. Then underneath the statue, he just strips his clothes off and then becomes completely naked and just shouts into the darkness and it's like, is there anyone else like me in this world?
Oh my God, the answer is no. Go home.
Wait, so this is what happens in the poem, or this is what
This is what happens in his personal life.
Oh,
wow.
That
he just like the poem reminds me of. reminds him of. And
That's so unhinged.
And then I feel like this is the exact same thing I would do. Like parental advisory, because I really like to get naked in my own place. It just feels really liberating.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. And then while he was contemplating whether to tell the world that he is gay to come out. Yeah. And just this is so powerful and so like intimate image that it's almost like overpowered, like overwhelmed this poem.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you remember which poem it was?
Yeah, let me have a look.
That's such a personal and vulnerable story to share.
Exactly.
I shouldn't have laughed at it. I apologize.
It's okay. Nakedness can be funny.
Ahim knows what I'm like. I'm very cynical. It's a problem.
Yeah. So
I'm working on it.
It's okay. So the poem is called "The Book of Genesis" by Kai Miller. It's a really short poem, but like his reviews is like 3 pages long for every poem. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's good. I love it when the review is longer than the actual thing.
Yeah.
It's just this sort of intrinsic loneliness that really speaks to me.
Yeah. We've all been there.
Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Okay, now let's move on to our next section. Stephanie Niu is a poet and interdisciplinary scholar from Marietta, Georgia. She's the author of Survived By, winner of the 2023 Host Publications Chapbook Prize, and She Has Dreamt Again of Water, winner of the 2021 Diode Chapbook Contest. She received her degrees in symbolic systems and computer science from Stanford University. Her poems have appeared in The Offing, Copper Nickel, Wax Wing, Ecotone, The Georgia Review, and elsewhere. She's currently a visiting fellow at Western Sydney University and is based on Christmas Island, where she is completing a Fulbright study/research award on community archiving for immigration and labor history. Ahim and I met Stephanie at Bankstown Poetry Slam. Shout out to BPS, a wonderful local arts organization. And we were blown away by Stephanie Niu's performance that night as a feature artist. And we're absolutely thrilled to have her here today as our first ever guest on Licensed Poetics.
So I first came across your work as this wonderful book, which is also your debut book.
Yeah.
She Has Dreamed Again of Water.
Yes.
Yeah, and then
we promptly bought a few copies of the book after hearing
many copies actually.
after Stephanie's
So
performance at BPS.
You remember Katie?
Yeah.
Katie also bought like lots of copies just to distribute on her birthday party.
She told me that. I was so astonished both by what a creative idea that is to give away books on your birthday and her generosity. So yeah, I was
we
touched.
love Katie's birthday parties. You go there and come home with a free book. It's incredible.
Yeah, I was like, perplexed at how could she afford that?
Well,
but yeah, so and then also I've listened to your audio production back in, I think it's 2018.
Yeah, it's quite old now.
Yeah. And I really love that. It's called Following the Water.
Yeah.
Also knowing you personally, you're a huge lover of scuba diving.
Yeah.
So, why do you think it's so important that to sort of the water and then its significance in your storytelling?
Yeah, water.
And then how do you channel this intimacy and the fluidity of water in your work?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think this is a question I was recently writing about because before I came back to Sydney here, I visited Dalian, which is a coastal town in North China.
That's where Ahim is from.
Really?
Oh
my God.
It's so special.
That's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What made you want to
I have family there. And
really?
I think it was my first time there that I can really remember since I was a baby. Like I spent a year there when I was 1 year old till I was 2. So it's where I learned to walk. It's where I learned to talk. But I have like really no memory of it as an adult. So I think it just felt really important to me to go back and like understand what it's like. I don't know, meet my aunt and uncle who like raised me for that year. Yeah, and I've always had this question of like, why do I love the water if I grew up in Georgia in this like inland town that's miles from the sea? And when I went to Dalian, I was like, maybe this has to do with it. It's so much defined by the coast, the seasons, you know, like the geography, the seafood you eat. So part of me is like, maybe it's because of the year I spent there.
Wow.
That's so interesting.
Wow, it's just so lovely because I also have this vivid memory of an activity what we call ganhai.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like almost in winter time we go to the coastlines, we go to the beaches, and then we wait for the tide to sort of wane, and then we collect whatever like crabs left on the sand.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah, I went in October and there were some people starting to, I guess it's considered dongyou because it's cold enough. Yeah. A lot of people just very leisurely swimming in the quite cold ocean, and they'd have like a jerry can of fresh water to just rinse off after and just have all their stuff on the rocks.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so beautiful. Oh, cool.
Oh, now we have a deeper connection.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think there's some part of me that's been drawn to the water, maybe because of growing up in Dalian for that 1 year. I think as an adult, the sensation of being in the water, it attunes my attention to things and to my senses in a way that's very different because you're not used to having to hold your breath. You become aware of your breath because everything that's down there doesn't really live on the land. I feel like I'm more visually attuned to everything.
Like some people say that it's the closest experience you can get to like being in the space.
Yeah, I think so because you can move vertically. I think I've had a lot of I feel like the other thing that features heavily in She's Dreamt Again of Water is flying and flight, and I've had a lot of flying dreams of different kinds, like you know, the kind where you move really slowly, like you're swimming through the air, the kind where you are actually a dragon made of Legos or something. But I've always wondered, like, how does my body know what it feels like to fly? And I think it's from swimming, because when you're down there, you can move through vertical space that you cannot on land.
Wow, it's so dynamic. And then you mentioned about like dreaming. I guess that's one of the bigger themes in your work as well. What do you think like these themes mean to you? Yeah,
dreams feel very important and similar to what poetry can do to me. I think poems are a place where you don't have to obey the logic of the natural world. I read this amazing poem called Science by Aracelis Girmay, and I think it began, or maybe at some point there was the line, when we were pelicans, and that was like such an amazing line to me because it just assumes.
I love that. Yes,
you know, it's just like, yeah, back then when we were pelicans.
I love it when they sort of jump straight in and just assume something that's completely unreal to be real, and then go off that. Yes. I love it when that happens.
Exactly. So it just immediately transports you to this alternate logic and this alternate world, and in a way that feels, sometimes it can feel more true, even though it's fictitious, even though it's surreal. You can create a more true feeling or a more true vision of the world in that dreamscape. And I think I'm really drawn to poetry that does that, and attracted to doing that in my own writing.
Let's go back to your academic background, because you did computer science and then
symbolic
systems.
Yeah,
which is quite unique.
Yeah. Symbolic systems is an interesting major because it's not really a phrase that means anything outside of that context, but it's traditionally drawing on a cognitive science background like linguistics, psychology, philosophy, and computer science. So yeah, I think you're noticing the sort of linguistics-like approach I took in those poems. I think I actually don't feel like I draw on my academic background very highly in my work.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, aside from maybe sometimes musings about phenomenology and like how we perceive things and how we perceive images. But in that poem, I was playing with sound, almost like I was trying to make music, but I was trying to treat the Chinese ideograms as pure sound and like rhyming them or near rhyming them with English words.
Wow.
And so that's why the poem reads, if you were to read it out loud, it's just a lot of sounds that are similar, even though it looks like maybe a picture on the page. So yeah, I think that was just a form of play for me to play with sound and the fact that words are images, and even in Chinese more so.
You remind me so much of Liang Li.
Really?
And that is that's a high compliment coming from me.
I love Liang Li.
I do too.
Oh my gosh.
We
she's
actually
like
talk about it.
A tier.
We actually talk about it in one of our previous episodes.
Yeah.
Wow.
We
About
read
your golden shovel poem.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
we
because
read a section of that poem.
Yes, I draw on his from Blossoms.
As
Yeah.
I love that one, and as Ahim was reading it, I was like, "Oh my god, this is so Liang Li." And then, as you were talking about your answer just now, I was thinking that one line from his poem, something to bite my monosyllables, because Chinese is monosyllable.
Yeah.
And he was using that. Oh,
Yeah,
he's a legend.
He's so like transcendently good.
Yeah.
So apart from Liang Li, who are the other authors or poets that really inspired you?
Yeah, it changes. I think most recently I was reading Codjoe. She had her first book is called Bluest, Nude, and it's a lot about desire and the body and motherhood and daughterhood. And I feel like she has a lot of mirroring in her work where a word will be repeated or a sound will be repeated, but it will change meaning as it's repeated.
Wow.
So it's like morphing, but the poems feel like a series of mirrors. And yeah, I just find her work very beautiful and in a way that feels timeless. Who else? I always love and recommend Aracelis Girmay. I feel like her voice and Amma's voices feel very like they pair very well in my mind.
Is she also a poet?
She's also a poet. Yeah, she's written The Black Maria and Kingdom Animalia and a few other books. But I went to Amma's launch of Bluest Nude in New York, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get to see her in person. And Aracelis was there. She was one of the readers. And Amma did this thing where she had the featured readers each read a poem from her book before they read a poem of their own. And Aracelis read Blueprint, which is my favorite book, a poem from that book. And I was like in tears. I was like, this is a dream come true.
Oh my god. What you were feeling in that moment was what we were feeling when we heard you at BPS.
Gosh, that's such a deep honor.
Do you mostly read poetry or do you read other genres as well?
I do read other genres. I can't read poetry or nonfiction before bed because I think it like gets me too riled up. So I try to keep fiction in the rotation. And then I try to read nonfiction as well.
I noticed that you said timeless. It's such an interesting word, and I also see you work with the concept of immortality a lot in your works.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like maybe writing in some ways is a way of resisting death. I saw this book recently called To Photograph is to Practice Dying. I think it's something like that. But I feel like a lot of making and a lot of art is like a little act of resistance against mortality.
To capture time.
Yeah.
So it doesn't go away.
Yeah, exactly.
So to leave something behind even though we're gone.
Yeah, I guess. Or to like better comprehend mortality or better wrestle with it. Yeah. When I was young, when I was 6, I had a thing my older sister called my crying phase because I think I suddenly had a realization that every moment would no longer exist the way it did in that moment. And it made me so sad. I was devastated. I would cry all the time.
You realized that when you were 6?
6? That's crazy.
I don't know what happened.
I guess that's why you...
What kind of kid were you, Stephanie?
Lol.
Was this before or after Dalian?
This is after. Dalian.
The water has done something to you.
The water taught me. But then I think I had just learned how to use Microsoft Word. And so I was like trying to write down everything that happened. It'd be like 8:03, went to go get a glass of water, like 8:05, put the water back. It was actually kind of like a problem.
I think all writing starts like that in some way.
I think that's the sort of like origin of the impulse that I think writing is now for me. It's like, let me try to capture this feeling before it's gone or this thought before it's gone. And writing feels like a way where that's actually possible.
Yeah.
Do you feel this urge just trying to like get out of the shower and then write anything down when you have this sort of like inspiration?
Not
Immediately.
Not as much. I think it's more rare these days that I'm like struck by inspiration. I need to get
Wait,
it down.
shower as in water? Like anytime Steph is struck by water, she just gets these
I
ideas.
can't touch the rain. I'll get an idea. Give me an umbrella. Yeah, sometimes things, I feel like I write when I read. Like once I receive enough input, it's just like natural that I'll want to write. So I feel like I can prepare myself to write just by reading a lot of good poetry. Or
that's how I work as well.
Really,
I find, reading like builds me up to it and kind of reminds me what the point of writing is.
Yes,
so that I'm more motivated to write. I'm like, well, if good writing can do this, then maybe there's a chance that my writing could do something similar.
Yeah, totally. It's like it dissuades any cynicism that you might have woken up with. You're like, oh, it is worth it after all.
Yeah. Stephanie, would you like to read one of your poems for our listeners?
I think because of our special Dalian connection, I'm going to read something really new that I wrote while I was in Dalian.
Yeah, that's incredible. That sounds perfect for this episode.
I just typed it up yesterday, so it's like really. It might be a little rough around the edges.
Oh my god, definitely no copyright issue then.
No copyright.
Initial release.
And we love some rough edges.
Okay, this is called Dalian. I touched the sea in the city where my grandparents met. The day was blue, the sea rough and green. It was October, the ocean finally opened for harvest. I practiced the word for abalone in my mind. 鲍鱼, 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 a fish in a word, a fish in a pocket of light. My grandparents' street must have been a pocket of light when they met. No one knew until the two young neighbors' love had already taken hold. Time took my grandfather young. Everyone agrees. My grandmother, alive and 90, holds on alone. This is the same city where I learned to speak and walk. I left young, before memory could take hold. No one told my mother her father had died because she was pregnant with me. Perhaps he held a part of his world by the coast open after he left. 鲍鱼, 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 the word for hold and the word for fish. Friends ask how I can love the sea if I grew up hours inland from the coast. I never knew. For years, I held this place only as an idea. Here at last, I edge my sneakers away from oncoming waves. I splash the surface of the seawater with my palms. When my mother found out her father was gone, she said I quaked in her belly so hard she thought she would split open. When I arrive, the abalone we will eat are already split and shining. My whole life, arriving at any sea, I have reached for the water with my hands. What is any pilgrim but you seeking 鲍, fish searching for ways to be held?
Thank you so much.
I'm always so emotional.
Aww.
Yeah, him has tears in his eyes. I can see.
Thank you.
I just want to say I love the clever imagery of abalone and the pregnant woman. And I also love time took grandpa young, and then there was another line where you lived there young before memory could take. I love the sort of like echoing and symmetry.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's the type of mirroring I was describing in Amma's poetry, and that I feel like since reading, I sort of see everywhere now, and it's a technique I love. It's like
I love this technique. It works every time.
What is it called?
Mirroring or
Mirroring.
Yeah,
symmetry?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a specific name, some sort of echoing.
In Chinese, it's called 对仗.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
Or 呼应, sorry.
Right. And I feel like because like the ocean is connecting, like it's connecting like each and every continent.
Yeah.
That almost feel like you can be everywhere all at once.
Yeah.
It's sort of like omniscience presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that everywhere at once feels also like a way of communing with the dead or with those who are not here. And like, yeah, I feel like reading this is like, yeah, I forgot how much it centers on my grandfather, his family and relatives are the ones who received me when I went to Dalian by myself. And it's like the connection we have is someone I've actually never met. And in a way feels like really
well, the
tied
sea
to
connects you, right? In
Yeah,
the first line, you
exactly.
say you touched the sea where they met.
Yeah, exactly.
connects
It's like
you.
this is the same water that they once touched, and that feels like in many ways like even more intimate than like touching our actual hands or being able to meet.
Another thing, would you consider Chinese as your second language?
I think I do now, yeah. But this also made me realize, or going back to Dalian, it was the first language I learned to speak. Like, I didn't know how to talk when I was there, and I did when I left. So it was all Chinese.
I think one thing that I wanted to say is that you said 鲍鱼, as in 鲍 means written differently. It also means to hold or to hug. I feel like that's a very like Chinese learner angle to view the language. Do you know what I mean? Because I think for Ahim and I, who are native speakers, we don't think of the word 鲍鱼and then we think hug. It's because it's written differently.
Yeah.
But whereas when you have like a language learner angle, you tend to spot puns like that almost. Maybe that's the reason Ahim loves puns so goddamn much in English, because like as a language learner, you have this other perspective where you see things like that.
I think that's so true. It definitely affects my humor and my puns in Chinese. I think it's almost like a defamiliarization of the words. Like they are just sounds to me sometimes, and it makes them more playful or more fun. Yes, it isn't the same word, but that bao is in that word, so it's like they're like cousins. It's fine. Yeah.
It's almost like you can take the words apart and then sort of like reconstruct it.
Yeah, and then as native speakers, we don't tend to do that. No. We do that for foreign languages or like learned languages, I think.
And also like with abalone is that like you can sort of hold the abalone shell to ear and sort of like hear the sound of the sea. That's what we call it. Yeah.
Well, that's very poetic, I think. Yeah. Like when you I don't think it's abalone shells. I think it's just any kind of shell.
Like shellfish.
Maybe, but like anything that there's an empty shell basically, and then you hold it to your ear and you can sort of hear the sound of the sea.
I think
try that next time.
I think in Dalian we use abalones a lot.
Oh, okay.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
And then sort of like they also have these like souvenirs, like sort of like souvenirs made of the abalone shells. It's like polished and shiny on the inside.
Yeah,
and rough on the outside.
Yeah, they're known for their beauty, and it's like impossible to ignore once you've eaten one. It's like, whoa, it's like a little mirror looking back at you.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I think, Stephanie, you've just convinced me to like the beach. I don't like the beach normally.
That's so funny. What an honor.
But I thought she just convinced you to like abalone.
I do like abalone. I did not need any convincing on that part.
That's so funny. Oh, thank you both for hearing that. I feel like glad to have gotten to read it.
Thank you so much for reading it. We loved it, and I'm sure our listeners loved it too. What an honor. Well, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you again to our guest, Stephanie. We'll leave her Instagram in the information. This is a podcast, Licensed Poetics. I'm your host, Fang Ling.
And I'm your host, Ahim.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in our next episode. Bye.
Till then, bye.